Good morning. Welcome this wonderful, chilly Sunday morning. So here's my question for y'all, though. How many of you were late getting here? Or maybe not even late, but were like running late getting here. And this is not this isn't to judge you, all right? Trust me, like as a dad with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, my life is permanently running late, which is actually really, really stressful for me. I'm a pretty punctual person. I like to be on time, if not even a little bit early. That's just who I am, okay? So naturally, all right, I do better because I am really punctual. It's a desire that I have. I just like to be on time. I do better in a car that has cruise control. Right? Are any of you guys with me? Any of you guys with me? Well, in college, I actually did not have a car with cruise. Okay, I had this little 95 Corolla, did not have cruise control, and like 6 out of my 7 tickets were definitely in that car. Okay? Because what would happen, right? I'm young and I'm in college and I'm irresponsible, and so I hit the snooze a few too many times, right? Like, I don't really want to get up. I don't really want to get up, even though I definitely had places to be, and I definitely wanted to be on time to those places, right? So the desire that I had didn't match my life exactly, and I can always just make it up by driving a little bit faster. Not that I tried to, right? It just sort of happened. It just sort of naturally starts creeping up, and then naturally the cop creeps up behind me and pulls me over. But right, we all have these desires that are kind of in us, and they're not even bad, right? My desire for punctuality isn't a bad thing, right? But my desire for punctuality can absolutely lead me into bad things, right? It actually still does. Even though I have cruise control, I don't speed anymore, I get way less tickets. I haven't had one in several years, right? But what does happen is, man, if we're running behind and my family is not getting on it to get out the door, I am a grumpy bear of a man to get my family out the door. I'm like yelling orders. I am not the man that Jesus wants me to be in the morning when we are running late. Let's just be real, right? Any of you guys with me? Any of you moms with me? Yeah, right? So our desires, even good things, can lead us into sin, right? James actually talks about this. He does. He talks about it the very beginning of the book in chapter 1, verse 14. He says, "Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. And these desires give birth to sinful actions, and when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death." See, temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. Our own desires. See, it's what's inside of us that actually tempts. Right? It's our own drives, it's our own desires. It's not even always bad things, but it tempts us to do bad things to get them. See, in Matthew 4, we see the story of Jesus. Right? It's right after he's baptized, he's about to start his ministry. And before he starts, he wants to get close to God. He wants to make sure he is connected, and so he goes into the desert alone and prays and fasts for 40 days. All right? For 40 days, he is in the desert. You see, and what we don't really know much about this time, other than the very end of it. The very end of it, we see the temptation of Jesus. You see, and a lot of times we read this story and we're like, man, look at the devil out there tempting Jesus. But when I read it in the lens of this James passage, what I see is the devil is simply placing before Jesus things that Jesus probably at some level desires. Right, and offers Jesus a way to meet those desires on his own, no matter the cost. Sounds familiar, right? So in verse 3, we see the start of the story. It just says, during that time, the devil came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, please tell those stones to become loaves of bread. See, but Jesus told him, no. The scripture says people do not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. See, the first temptation is pretty surface level, right? And each one actually will get progressively a little bit deeper. But this first one's not that complicated, right? Jesus is hungry. If you were fasting for 40 days in a desert, you would be hungry too. Jesus is hungry, and he says, hold on. If you're the Son of God, just turn those stones into bread. But what that actually is in each of us, because none of us, I believe, have the power to turn stones into bread. Otherwise, you just look like a lunatic, like out there, like gnawing on big rocks, right? None of us can do that. But what it actually says to us is that we do not trust God to provide for our needs. That's what this was. It says, I don't trust that God is going to provide for my needs. So just do it yourself. How many of you guys have ever heard of a guy named Abraham Maslow? Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow was a sociologist around the turn of the century in like the 1900s, and he developed this thing called the hierarchy of need. The hierarchy of need. Have any of you ever heard of the hierarchy of need? It's something that we live, or that we learn about in school often, but, and I'm not here to actually promote it. I'm not here to discuss the legitimate validity of it, but what it does say to us, that I believe is very true, is that we have a lot of needs as people that are not just the normal ones that you think of. It's not just the I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I'm tired, I need sleep, whatever. Like, it's not just those needs. That's just the basic entry-level need. You see, we have a lot of higher needs as well. Things like the need to feel secure, the need for relationship and community, the need for friendship, the need for, and this one's interesting, the need for purpose. See, we've been created with all of these needs. God created us with needs, with desires, with drives, and those things are not bad. None of them are bad. It's when we stop trusting God to provide for them. That's where we get into trouble. All right, so let's jump into one that I think all of us here can relate to at some level. Right? But the need for financial security. Right? And this is how we get in trouble with this. Right? The need for financial security. All of us are like, man, I need to have enough. I do. I need to have enough. I need to know that, like, I'm not going to live in poverty. Okay, or that I'm not going to be secure. I need that safety. I need that, right? And so we start listening, though, to the devil, who's throwing out some things before us, and he starts selling us on like what our need actually is. Because suddenly financial security in America starts to look a lot like, well, we got to have a retirement plan. We got to have that 401k looking nice. We got to have a college fund for our kids before they can even walk. Like, how is their college not paid for already? We have to have the nice new car. We've got to have the house with the garage. We got to have this and that, and we've got to have a good. You know what? We not only have to have enough to survive on, but we have to have enough to save, so that in case we ever lose our job, like, we have that safety net that we can live for 3,500 years in order, like, in the savings. It's insane the amount that we feel like we have to to feel financially secure, because that's what America sells us. That's what our society sells us, is that it's not enough to have enough. You have to have more. And that is God providing for you. Right? And so we start to lack trust. When we don't see that more, we start to feel like maybe, you know what? I don't really trust that He's going to provide for me. And so we have to go out and we have to take that more for ourselves. Right? And so what do? We stop being generous. We stop giving money away because we need the more. It is our need. God's not going to provide for us. It's our need. It's our money in the first place, so why would I give it away? Why would I be generous to that waiter or waitress? Why would I be generous to that widow? Why would I be generous to those people that really genuinely have not enough? Why would I? Right? And so we start to lose the generosity, and then we start to be like, you know what? The government doesn't really need my money. So we start to maybe fudge a little on our taxes. It's like, well, they're not going to know. They don't really check. Like, right? I don't make that much money. It wouldn't be worth their time. So, right, we start to do things that definitely outside of God's plan for us. All because we don't trust God to actually provide and give us what we need. See, that's how it works. And you can apply that to anything. You can apply that to the need for community and relationships. You can apply that for the need for I believe, family stability. You can apply that to fill in the blank. Pick a need. We're willing, because we don't trust God to provide it, we're willing to do whatever it takes to get it ourselves. See, but Jesus simply says, people do not live by bread alone, but on every word from the mouth of God. See, God will provide. God will give us the things that we need. He will. God knows our needs a whole lot better than you do. Do you believe that? I guess that's question number one. Do you believe that God actually understands your need better than you do? The God that created us with the needs. See, I do. I believe that He understands the things that I need better than I do. See, but Satan doesn't stop there. That was just like, that was an easy. That was a softball temptation. He goes on. He says, then the devil took him to the holy city, Jerusalem, to the highest point of the temple, and said, if you are the Son of God, jump off. For the scriptures say He will order His angels to protect you, and they will hold you up with their hands so that you don't even hurt your foot on a stone. Preach it. Right? How many of us would love to hear that sermon? Like, oh man, the angels, he's gonna hold us up, and we're not even gonna strike our foot, and we're just gonna like float. It'll be like this skipping merrily through a flower field, right? Like, I think all of us would love to hear that sermon. But that was the temptation. That's what Satan was offering Jesus and floating out. You see, the temptation and the what we often think is this: I don't trust that God cares about me. Right? It's like not only in this moment of need, but I don't trust that God actually cares. So in these moments, in these situations, in these parts of life that are just dark, when we're sitting and when we find ourselves lonely, when we find ourselves broken, and we're just waiting. We're just waiting. We start to ask God, like, God, do you even care for me? Do you even love me? And I think God can handle that. I actually don't think that that's the question that's the sin. I think that comes when we start saying, God, prove it. Prove it. Prove you love me. Prove you care about me. If you really love me, you would do this. If you really love me, you would give me a little bit more. If you really love me, you would allow my family to be a little less broken. If you really love me, you'd allow my husband or my wife to love me a little bit more. If you really love me, you'd allow my children to be successful. If you really love me, you'd allow me to get a little bit better job. If you really love me, this and this and this. The list goes on. If you really love me, prove it. See, that's dangerous, but I've been there, and I understand it. When I was first out of seminary, I remember my wife was working. She was working full time at that point, and I was hitting the job trail. Right, I would send out resume after resume after resume to any church that might be looking and anything that I might be able to do. And I just wanted to serve God. I just wanted to be able to do what He wanted me to do. That's it. That's all I was wanting. It's like I didn't care where, I didn't care what. I just wanted to serve God in a church the way that I'd been trained to do. That was it. And time after time after time, the answer was no, we're going to go with him, we're going to go with her, we're going to go with this person over there. And you know what I started to think? I started to feel like God didn't want me. That here I am desperately asking God to use me. Desperately asking God to just take my life and do what you want with it. Like, send me wherever you want. I'm willing to do anything for you. And like, it started to feel like God didn't want me. So I said, like, God, if you really love me, you'd give me a job. If you really love me, you'd give me a ministry. If you really love me, you'd take what I'm offering you. Prove it. Prove it. That's what I was saying to God. See, because I didn't trust that He cared about me enough to get me through that darkness in His way. Because you know what, like, I can look back and I can say, like, God, it's not that God didn't want to use me, it's that God didn't want my pride. God didn't want the fact that I felt like I was ultimately worth using because I had training. He didn't. And it took me a long time to learn that lesson, but that darkness is for a reason. That loneliness is for a reason if you're really trusting God to care for you through it. He will teach you something with it. See, the problem is prove it as a drug. It is. Prove it's a drug. And with any drug, you always need a little bit more, right? When I was young and could run more than 20 feet, I actually used to play soccer. And the thing about when you play a sport, right, is you hurt all the time. Like, all the time. Honestly, like, when you're playing sports, I don't know how more people don't think to themselves, like, you know what? This is probably bad for me. It probably is. But when I was young, I didn't care because it was fun, right? So what did I do, though? Because I didn't obviously want to just hurt all the time. I took ibuprofen, because that's what you do. You take ibuprofen. It's anti-inflammatory. It's good, right? And so when I started taking ibuprofen when I was young, I took 2 because that's the recommended dose. That's what you're supposed to take. And guess what? It worked great. I stopped hurting. Shoulders felt good, back felt good, legs felt good, right? It did its job. Over time, I no longer could take 2 because if I took 2, guess what? I still hurt. So my entry dose was 4. Prescription amount, right? Still not going to hurt me. It's fine. I'm just going to take 4. Okay, so I take 4. Well, guess what happens if I had a lot of pain, though? Yeah, I'd take more because suddenly I couldn't take the small amount that I was supposed to. I had to take more and more and more and more. And I can remember on 2 separate occasions, like taking at least 12 at one time. Right? And honestly, I'm so thankful that God spared me any negative effects from that beyond just actually both of those occasions. I ended up hurting myself worse. Because I should have been like, you know what, I can't walk. I probably shouldn't be playing. But instead, I hurt myself worse because I forced myself to. Because I took way, way too much. But prove it is the same way, guys. It is. Eventually, you're going to lead yourself to demand way too much. And that safe amount is no longer ever going to be enough. You see, when you start asking, it's crazy. When you start asking initially, when you're like, God, prove that you love me, and then you're just waiting, and God sends a gentle breeze and it brushes your face, and you're like, thank you for that hug. I know you care about me. I know you love me. And it's awesome. And you're like, that was so easy. Right, but fast forward 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? And suddenly, you're like, God, you find yourself in a dark place and you just need him. And you're like, God, show me that you love me. And he comes down in a pillar of fire and is just right there. And you're like, God, see how awful the world is? Everything's on fire. Because you can no longer see him. It's not enough, right? If you need actual proof, read the Old Testament anywhere, pretty much, right? You can jump in almost anywhere in the Old Testament and see a story of Israel demanding more proof from God. Israel demanding that God show them more and more and more, right? Immediately after, he sends them through the Red Sea and conquers with the sea Pharaoh's army. Gives them safety and security out of 500 years of slavery. They're free. Gives them freedom. And what do they almost immediately start doing? They're like, God, you don't even care about us. You don't love us. You just sent us out into this desert to die. We're going to starve to death. At least in Egypt we had food. Right? They are automatically, immediately demanding proof from God. Demanding that God would be for them, right? And so God gives them food, and then they're like, well, you didn't even give us meat. You don't care about us. And so he gives them meat, right? It's just a list after list after list. See, and we do it. We do it all the time. We don't trust that God really cares about us, and we demand that proof. See, but Jesus just simply said, you must not test the Lord your God. So he understood. He understood. He got it. Eventually it'll never be enough. Right? But Satan wasn't done. He went one layer deeper. He says this. Next the devil took him to the peak of a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. I will give it all to you, he said, if you will kneel down and worship me. Look at everything. Every kingdom. I'll make you the ruler of all of it. All you got to do is kneel down and worship me. See, he was offering him to be the King of Kings. That's what he was offering. It's like, you can be the King of Kings. What do we know Jesus as today? He's the King of Kings, right? See, but how did he become the King of Kings? If we read the rest of Matthew, we see it's because he lived a life. He took on so much persecution. He took on all of the world's hate. He took on all of our sin, all of the unrighteousness, all of the rebellion that has ever taken place against God. He took that rebellion on himself. He said, I will suffer the consequences of that rebellion. I will suffer the punishment for you so that you do not have to. And he was nailed to the cross, but then he conquered death and rose again, and now he is the King of Kings sitting next to Jesus, or next to the Father in heaven. That was the path that God had for him, but it was not an easy one. Taking on the world's hate, taking on hell for us, was not an easy one, and he knew that. He knew that at that moment in the desert when Satan said, you know what? I can make you the King of Kings now. See, Satan was offering to give Jesus a shortcut. He was offering to Jesus a shortcut, but what it actually says to us is, I don't trust God with his path for my life. See, but what can we see from this shortcut? See, Jesus would have been the King of Kings for sure, briefly, for a fleeting moment. And not in the way that God ever desired for us. See, it was a counterfeit. That's what Satan was offering. How many of you guys have ever heard of a website called Wish.com? Wish.com. Occasionally my wife will buy something off of Wish.com, but Wish is a place where you can go and you can get these just products occasionally for just insanely cheap. Too cheap. You know what I'm saying? Right, I found a pair of Beats headphones, right, and I found them they were $500 headphones. I found them for $33, right? $33 for a pair of Beats headphones, right? What a steal. What a great deal for those headphones, right? No, it's not a good deal for those headphones. Why? Why? Come on, they're not real Beats headphones. You know that going in. It's like these are a counterfeit thing. They're a cheap knockoff. See, why do people spend $500 on Beats headphones? You might be, like some of you are thinking like, well, brand recognition, marketing, people are bad with money. I don't know. So I don't know what all of you guys are thinking. But the reality is people buy those because they value sound quality. They value the build quality. They want quality. They want the real thing. They want the quality product. They don't want the cheap knockoff. See, Satan does this all the time with God's plan as well. Constantly. Right? He's constantly offering counterfeit versions of the real thing. Right? Oh, you want relationship? Great. Right? God's way takes work, right? You got to be vulnerable. You got to be willing to give of yourself. You've got to be willing to take on people's burdens. You've got to be willing to sacrifice your time for people. You got to be willing to share your heart, and that's scary, right? Don't worry about that. I can give you a relationship over here. All you got to do is friend someone on Facebook. That's it. Easy peasy. Boom. And then you only get to, all they ever see is the good stuff. They get to see how happy your life is and how much you travel and all the places you've seen. Right? What great relationship, but man, that's counterfeit. It is. It's a counterfeit version. You see, or like, hey, you know what? You know what? the things that God actually says about parenting and discipline and raising and being intentional and all of those things and allowing kids to actually have some freedom to grow and all of those things that God says about parenting, you know what? That stuff's hard. It's really hard to be intentional with your kids. So like, how about instead you just work, you hire a nanny, right? Or better yet, you just you hover and you control every tiny detail of their life to protect them so that you never have to deal with the hard stuff because they never have to deal with the hard stuff. Right? It's easier. So all right, cool. But that's a counterfeit. Right? We can find counterfeits all over. Or hey, you want to come and accept Jesus? Cool. How about you come to church, right, once a week. You come to church for an hour. You sing some songs. You go back. You take communion, whatever. It's all good. You do that, and then you go back to your life. But make sure you're only listening to K-Love because any other music is, well, the devil, okay? So as long as you're doing that through the week, right, you pray before meals, we're good. Welcome. You've found Jesus. That's what Jesus offers. It's the problem with that. See, it's counterfeit. It's a cheap knockoff. So you can always tell the cheap knockoff because what ends up happening to cheap stuff? It ends up broken. When we settle for counterfeits in our life, and we know they're counterfeits because they're going to leave you broken. They will. They'll leave you empty. And too often, we settle for that, and we settle for that emptiness, and we settle for that brokenness because we actually think we have the real thing. But the real thing can be hard. The real thing takes time, it takes work. It takes effort. It takes sacrifice. But it won't leave us broken. It'll give us life. See, the real thing actually started this day. The day that Jesus did not take the shortcut. And he said, "Away from me, Satan, you must worship the Lord your God and serve him only." That's when the real thing began, is because Jesus walked his path. He trusted God. He trusted him with the outcome. And now because of that, God has given us a path too. And while each of our paths is unique, each of them have one thing in common. They are all through Jesus Christ. That if we want the best possible outcome, if we want the real thing, it has to go through Jesus Christ. See, because he's the real thing. And it doesn't have to go, it's not through a church pew. It's not through a Sunday morning. It is through the person of Jesus Christ that says, worship him and serve him. And all I ask is that you lay down your counterfeits. You lay down those broken headphones and you pick up the real thing. You pick up the real thing. See, but that can be hard. It can't, because we want to cling to those instead of just giving them to God and trusting that, you know what, God's path for me. God's way is really better. I believe that, and I hope you do as well. Let's pray.